Right. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I would like to welcome all our viewers and students from across the world for today's webinar, which is Zakat Management in a Changing World. Today's webinar comprises of a dialogue with Sister Yasmina Franca, who is the CEO of the South African National Zakat Foundation, which is one of the largest Zakat institutions in South Africa. This webinar is brought to you by IBFNet, which is a group of companies in Ireland, Singapore, and Malaysia to develop and host multiple blockchain platforms and use cases to build a miniature Islamic economy, focusing on philanthropy, not-for-profit, and for-profit segments, and aiming to convert traditional contracts into smart contracts using the Algorand protocol. IBFNet also provides a suite of certifications in halal business and finance like Zakat management, Waqf management, as well as courses in blockchain technology. All of that you could visit our website to find out more. Just some house rules before we begin. So a reminder for all our participants, as a special token of appreciation for all of you who have joined, you will be getting specific IBF tokens that power the IBF network exchange on the blockchain. The further details on how these tokens can be used or redeemed will be emailed to you after the webinar, inshallah. And while the presentation is happening, if you have any questions or if you have any comments, you could drop them in the chat box, and inshallah we'll take it up with our esteemed speaker after her presentation. All right. So leading the country's biggest Zakat organization is no easy task. And our speaker for today, Sister Yasmina, who's also amongst the top 20 influential women in Islamic finance and business. She became Sansa's first CEO in 2018 and has been a leading voice and a beacon contributing to socioeconomic development throughout the country and getting global recognition and accolades for her work. Sister Yasmina also holds accreditation and qualification in Zakat management, Islamic finance, social sciences, management, and marketing. She has over 25 years of experience in the corporate world, where she worked in the financial services sector at some of the top companies in South Africa. So without taking any more time, I would like to now invite Sister Yasmina to please take the stage for her presentation. Welcome.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much, Zahid, for that introduction. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you so much to IBFNet for this opportunity and for this platform to have a conversation around specifically the South African National Zakah Fund's experience in terms of Zakah management during these times, and I think changing times as per the topic. And I thought what would be good is to share firstly a little bit about the South African National Zakah Fund, so that there is a context to who we are as an organization. And for that, I prepared a few slides. So I'm going to try and share that. If you can tell me if you can see it, that would be helpful.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So, you know, they always say that you need to know where you come from in order to plot your way forward. So that's exactly what I've done with this particular presentation. I have worked on a bit of a context because I think it's important for the participants to understand the South African National Zakah Fund in the context of South Africa and the role that we play in terms of delivering a service to those who are in need in South Africa. So what I've done is I've prepared a little bit of a structure to the presentation. I'll speak a little bit about South Africa as a country and give an overview, because I think it's important to understand our environment, and then speak to the cultural dynamics, which is very different to perhaps in Indonesia or in Malaysia, and then speak about the religion in South Africa to get a sense of how we as Muslims in as a minority work within a non-Muslim environment, and then the formulation of the Muslim NGOs and the importance of their role in the society. And then I'll spend a little bit more time talking about the Sansa model and our experience. So I'll rush through quickly on the historic and the context. Okay, so South Africa has a population of about 60 million people. And I think we're the only nation state named after our geographic location, as in we, the southernmost tip of Africa, and we are called South Africa. And we are a multi-ethnic society. We encompass a wide range of cultures, of languages and religions in South Africa. And many of you know the issue of the 1948 to 1994 apartheid system, which is a system of institutionalized racial segregation. And it's important to raise that point because some of our structural poverty that we have in the country, and hence the role of an organization like the South African National Zakat Fund, is necessary because of the ills of this period where institutional racial segregation was the order of the day. But in 1994, we became a constitutional democracy where our constitution is the highest law in the country. We are also a highly developed economy. We have advanced infrastructure in parts of our country, mostly in our urban cities. We're also the world's largest exporter of gold, platinum, and other resources. So there's huge polarization in our country regarding the haves and the have-nots. Great wealth, but also extreme poverty. We're well established in terms of our financial, our legal, our communication and energy infrastructure, but also our transport sector. And on the continent of Africa, South Africa has the largest stock exchange. So there's lots of good things about the country to speak about, but I think a lot of this in terms of our changing environment is currently being impacted. So in terms of our culture, everybody knows South Africa as the Rainbow Nation. And I'll speak a little bit about that. We have 11 official languages in South Africa, and in our own national anthem features 5 of that 11 languages, roped into one anthem. So we were the first colonial outpost of the Dutch East Indian Company in 1652. So often when I was at school, was in the apartheid years, and the history that we were taught was South Africa was founded in 1652, implying that there was nobody here in 1652. But as we know, there were local inhabitants in South Africa, but the Dutch East Indian Company established themselves in 1652 and put themselves in power as a colonizer. So in terms of their arrival in South Africa in 1652, we were then as a country divided into colonizer and native. Colonizer and the inhabitants of South Africa.
Sister Yasmin, sorry to interrupt. I think your voice is breaking a bit.
Oh, okay. I'll try not to move around.
Yeah, it's better now.
Okay. And so we were divided into colonizer and native, into white and non-white and free, and those who were found here in South Africa was also enslaved. So when we talk about our national identity, it was mostly amongst racial lines. So we were divided as a country into what was called whites, coloreds, Asians, and blacks. And even within that, there were different belief systems and traditions. So today, when we speak about the Rainbow Nation, there is the acceptance and the acknowledgement that all these fragmented groups has actually found a way of coexisting. And this has been many years since the 1652s, and it wasn't a natural and easy transition. And so much of what we see in terms of social issues has been how we as a nation had to navigate through a very tricky history. So aspects of religion in South Africa, the right to freedom is enshrined in our South African constitution. So as Muslims, alhamdulillah, we can practice Islam freely and openly. And there are 5 main religions in South Africa, the dominant one being Christianity. And then there are quite a few traditional African religions. Islam, Hinduism, and Judaism is definitely in the minority, but it exists and it exists freely. So when you look to what is a expression of the diversity of Islam in South Africa, across those groups that I've mentioned, there is Islam amongst whites, amongst blacks, amongst Indians, amongst coloreds. Islam is not limited to one particular racial group in South Africa. And so when we talk to Islam, it is in South Africa, it is not necessarily speaking to a particular group per se. But just to talk about how Islam came to South Africa, there's 3 things we have to focus on. And there were 3 growth phases. So as I mentioned, in 1652, there was involuntary migration of slaves, artisans, political prisoners, and exiles from the Dutch East Indian Company. So in fact, in 1658, the first Muslims arrived in Cape Town, which is the southernmost tip and the southernmost part of South Africa. And they were actually slaves and political exiles from Indonesia, specifically the islands of Malabar and also from Java and Sumatra. So there's lots of links in terms of Islam in South Africa with Indonesia. And some of the exiles at that time were well-known scholars, religious scholars, such as Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar and Tuan Guru, who was instrumental in establishing the first masjid in South Africa. So there's quite a lot of links with South Africa's Islam and Indonesia and Malaysia. The second growth phase for Muslims in South Africa was in the 1860s, when we saw quite a lot of indentured laborers from India, which was under the British rule at the time, who came to work in South Africa, in Natal, which is now called Durban, in South Africa. And then also in 1994, when we became a democracy and we opened up our borders a lot freer to our neighboring states, which is the rest of Africa, we opened our borders and many African Muslims entered South Africa. So the majority of our Muslims in South Africa are Sunni, and we have as Muslims succeeded in many ways to preserve our religious identity and the prescribed religious norms and values. And over time, this has benefited both ourselves and our communities, specifically when you look to the delivery of the pillars of Islam, specifically when we talk to the months of Ramadan, when we talk to Zakat, when we talk to even the performance of Hajj, and how that has been structured and formalized within our communities as well. But we live in a country in South Africa that has what we normally call the triple threat, which is unemployment, inequality, and structural poverty. And it's important for us as the South African National Zakat Fund to speak to these triple threats, because this is our environment and this is the changing times that we work in. So South Africa has a high unemployment rate, and we have about 40% of our population of the 60 million I spoke about unemployed. And many of them are from the informal sector in terms of their qualifications. But we have found now that a huge percentage of our youth is unemployed, even having qualified and being, for example, a qualified electrical engineer, unable to find work. So unemployment is high in South Africa, and in that itself, as a social ill, highlights the need for community organizations and non-government organizations to come in and play a significant role. The second threat that we have is the inequality in South Africa. Earlier, I spoke about the great wealth that we have, and that's enjoyed by a few, but the majority of South Africans live in poverty. So if you look to the two pictures I put here, and what I try to depict here is the inequality. There is literally many places in South Africa where a single road divides the haves from the have-nots. So you see these beautiful residential plush suburbs, and a road divides it between a shanty town and an informal settlement. And this is a common thing in South Africa because we are divided amongst these racial lines still, where the whites and the middle income groups are way more affluent than the struggling lower end of the market. South Africa is also, in terms of the Gini coefficient, which measures the gap between the haves and the have-nots, South Africa is, I think, for a good few years, sat in the top 2 or 3 in the world of having the biggest disparity in terms of economic inequality. So that's another thing that contextualizes where we are at in South Africa. Then we have poverty in terms of the unemployment that I spoke about earlier, people who are unable to find jobs, people who are unable to put together a dignified existence is a common phenomena. And so we find high numbers of food insecurity, high numbers of unemployment. But amidst all of that, we do find that there is strength in terms of faith, in terms of hanging on to what we believe in. So through this, we have to talk about the role of Muslim NGOs. As I mentioned, the freedom of religion is recognized in most countries and through your Bill of Rights, and so too in South Africa. So in many countries where Muslims are minorities, recognition are given to them, and also including the right to organize themselves and their community independently and to establish the Islamic socioeconomic and even political systems. And this is something we as Muslims in South Africa also enjoy. So we are able to formulate our own Muslim political parties. We're able to form our own masajid committees. We're able to form our own non-government organizations, such as the South African National Zakat Fund. So historically in South Africa, Muslim organizations started off as informal social gatherings and networks, and through that they tried to serve the needs of fellow Muslims. But over time, those have developed into organizations with stable and also visible vertical and horizontal giving structures. So it's unlike countries where it is a Muslim majority countries and the government play that role of determining or appointing community organizations to serve, and even in the sense of collection and the distribution of zakat. So in South Africa in the 1990s and from the year 2000 onwards, as Muslim Nexus, we started to formalize our status as professional non-government unit. And many of our organizations started to register themselves formally. And the only way that we can exist and get recognized in South Africa is through the Department of Social Development, where we register ourselves as a non-profit organization, which is a term that is used in South Africa, which essentially is an NGO. And so this has happened in the 1990s and the 2000s. And so you will find in South Africa many non-government organizations as Muslim non-organizations, such as the South African National Zakat Fund. I think that is a little bit of our historical context. I'd like to now just talk a little about the SANZAF's model. So South African National Zakat Fund, we shortened for SANZAF. We drive our mandate through the slogan of changing lives through development and relief, because we believe that there is definitely a need to give a man the fish, because as I've shown you, in our country, there are many people suffering food insecurity, but we know that we have to teach to fish as well, so that there is an active plan to break the cycle of poverty. And that's when we talk to the development aspect of the work that we do. So I tried to put the model together of SANZAF's Zakat management model, and I'll run through it very quickly just to give you a sense of how we operate. So we have two focus areas, which is Zakat collection and then the Zakat distribution. So under Zakat collection, there's about 5 main activities. So we tend to do a lot of Muzaki education and advocacy. So you'll find SANZA very active on educating on Zakah, and also advice and guidance relating to the fiqh of Zakah. And that leads to advice and guidance to the calculation of Zakah. And those 3 elements work well together, because we find that people need guidance in terms of which of their wealth is zakatable. And you find often products available today, whether it's through asset management, whether it's through banking, people aren't sure whether the funds that they've invested there are zakatable. And a lot of these modern day Islamic finance structures needs to be explained. And so we try to build that intellectual capital in the organization, so we're able to guide Muslims in South Africa. And that then gets us to a point where we even facilitate and transact zakah payments. And so the donor would then pay their zakah after being comfortable that they know what zakah is due on their wealth, how to calculate that, and then they would do their zakah via SANZAF. And so there's continuous communication and feedback to the Muzaki, so that on an annual basis, they have SANZAF top of mind to disperse their zakah. On the other side, in terms of zakah distribution, we follow a very stringent process. We have an application process that the mustahiq follows, and that is obviously to ensure that we have a structured zakah eligibility assessment process in place. And that assessment process determines what welfare assistance is given, but also what possibilities there are to enroll that particular mustahiq in a development program. And then there's the monitoring, the output, and the reporting. And we try our level best to evaluate impact. And here we link up with organizations such as the World Zakat, where there are systems in place, and programs and research done in terms of coming up with an index to determine the impact, because I think every organization, not just in South Africa, worldwide, all Zakah institutions has this desire to determine what impact we have. And then underlying those 2 very key functions that SANZAF deliver are the kind of fundamentals of any organization, which is our administration, our operational support functions. We have HR, we have finance, we have marketing, we have IT structures that supports the entire SANZAF functionality. We also have Sharia compliance in the sense of a Sharia advisory board, to guide us on any fiqh issues, any new issues. We're very keen and determined around governance and reporting, because I think working in the public space, we understand our responsibility when we work with public money to report and be accountable and transparent and to follow the strictest governance principle. And then there's the monitoring and evaluation. We still have lots to do under monitoring and evaluation, but it is part of our model. So there's a constant reminder that we have to make sure that we stay on track. So we deliver to a set of values. We public about the values that we have as an organization so that it tells a donor whether there is a match, whether the donor can buy into the kind of values that Sansa have espoused to, because we place it out there so people can see and the public can know what it is that's important to us. So we serve for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We serve with compassion, respect, proficiency, and excellence. And we are accountable and transparent. We are committed to empowerment and empowering others and ourselves, and committed to making a positive impact. And when we speak to governance and accountability, SANZAF puts out its financials every year. We try and do it within 90 days after our financial year end. And we do it in a way that is easily understandable by the public. So this is something that you could see that has gone out this past financial year, but we also put out the actual financials for the more accounting public that wanting to see the balance sheet, the income statement, the changes of statement of changes in funds, all of those things go out, but we do it also in a way that's easily understandable to the public. With reporting on our financials, we've adopted the integrated reporting standards, which is now a new standard under the International Financial Reporting Standards. And so last financial year, we adopted 5 capitals, which we believe are capitals that we impact, and that's financial capital, human capital, intellectual capital, relationship capital, and social capital. And we reported in respect of how our efforts is making a difference in those 5 capitals. So just to talk about how SANZAF has grown over the past 5 years, just to show some of the income and distribution numbers. So in the first table where it says income by category, you will see from 2017 to 2021, our income has hovered around 160 to 170 million. In 2018 and 2019, there was a slight dip, and that is internal dynamics where we cleaned our policy relating to directed funding. And so there was a little bit of clean out in terms of projects that we then passed on to other organizations. So it appears as that the income was impacted there, but those were huge projects that we handed over to other organizations to handle on our behalf. But alhamdulillah, in the last financial year, 2021, which was the year 1442, and we align our financial year so that we only have one Ramadan in our financial year, because we do tend to have high collections in the month of Ramadan, and it would skew our numbers if we were to have 2 Ramadans. Our financial year does sometimes consist of 11 months, because the Islamic, the lunar calendar is shorter than the Gregorian calendar. So in 2021, we collected, alhamdulillah, 166.8 million. And when I talk about 166.8 million, I'm talking about collection from a Muslim minority community in South Africa, which is only but 2% of the 60 million population in South Africa. So we have about 2.5 million South Africans that are Muslims, and alhamdulillah, we've collected, and we are but one of many Muslim NGOs that offers the Zakat collection and distribution service to the community. At the same token, on the other table, we indicated our distribution, in other words, the projects and the programs that we have have executed in the year. So we try and deliver 100% of Zakat collected in the financial year. But what we find that is often that we do get funding just a month before we close our financial year. So often when you see there a 97% distribution, that 3% is more than likely earmarked for the very next month or the month thereafter. But as we close our books, we sit on as high as 97% of the Zakat collected in that particular financial year, because it is our one of our principles to deliver within the year of collection. Some of the other highlights that we talk about as Sansa, our projects, our programs, and our people. Just in the past financial year, we delivered over 250 tons of food in food relief. We served over 150,000 families through financial support. And just as an example, what financial support would be is when a family, maybe a father or one of the breadwinners have lost their job and there's a potential for the family to be evicted because they don't have the necessary funds to cover the rent, or families who have fallen into debt. So those would be financial support that we would give. But we have also spent over 20 million in development programs. So those would be our bursary programs, our developing our youth in terms of giving them a skill so that they could become more employable. So our total distribution in the past financial year was 144 million. But something we must talk about, which is in the second block, is our administration, our expenses. We try to keep as low as possible. Alhamdulillah, in the past financial year, we've managed to keep it below 10%, because I think as financial, as non-profit organizations and also Zakat management organizations, it's important for the donors to see how much it costs us to distribute. And so as frugal as possible when it comes to that. We also speak about what our organization look like in terms of our people. So we have about 108 staff members. Our proportion of male to female is we are slightly more females, 57% females. And alhamdulillah, we have about 70 of our staff members in the past year who had gone through structured training programs. And about 98% of our staff members are qualified as Black, and the terminology of Black would be all groups except white, so that would be Indian and colored as well. So I thought I'd just show you some of our other programs that we get involved in: emergency relief, feeding scheme. We're also quite involved when it comes to Qurbani. But then also when we talk to education, empowerment and development, it starts off from ECD level, which is early childhood development level, right through to adult learning and to our bursary program. And we also get involved in some of the Waqf programs in South Africa. This is the kind of thing that we do on a regular basis, where we do campaigns and we try and make everybody participate, not just those who need to pay Zakat, but any person in South Africa who wants to contribute towards education, poverty relief, anything that they find is important to them. We make it as easy as being able to donate about 50 Rand per month. And that, I think in the context of, perhaps if I could contextualize it for you from an affordability point of view, so 50 Rand would probably be the equivalent of 2 loaves of bread. So I don't know what a loaf of bread costs in your country, but if you were to just do a value of 2 loaves of bread, that is probably what signing up for a 50 Rand debit order. And the important thing about debit orders is that over time, those little debit orders starts to accumulate, and it's to some extent some level of guarantee that you have that you're at least going to get in your debit orders at the end of the month, and you're able to plan your projects and programs accordingly. Similarly, our food programs, and this has become, it was quite amplified during COVID, because there was huge food insecurity in COVID. And we found that people enjoy getting behind feeding schemes. And so we also make it easy where we're saying, you know, you can serve 8 meals for the month and then give them a debit order of 96 Rand per month. And if 50 Rand was about 2 loaves of bread, then this is about 4 loaves of bread. So I think just as I close off a little bit on Sansa, just to mention that Sansa was recognized by Cambridge IFA for 2 years in a row now, having received the award, the Global Good Governance Award for, and we call it the 3G because global, good, and governance are 3Gs, for transparency and then also for capacity building. Similarly, we've been recognized. If you look to the article in one of our local newspapers, it was an article that spoke about the management at Sansa. So it says 2 women drive SA's biggest Islamic charity, and that was made reference to our chairperson, who's a female, and myself as the CEO, who's also a female. And Sansa being the longest and long-standing and biggest Islamic charity in South Africa. But I think, you know, the context around the lockdown, we cannot, I think, ignore the impact that this has, specifically as we're talking about a changing environment. So South Africa went into a lockdown, a hard lockdown on the 23rd of March in 2020, and that had a huge impact on us. Even though we received permission to operate as an essential service delivery, and we continued, we had to do a lot in ensuring our own staff safety, but we nonetheless were able to deliver a vital service. And post-COVID, I was also asked by other organizations just to share what it was that Sansa was able to navigate through. And some of the things to reflect on was just during that period, having clarity of purpose, you know, knowing exactly what your mandate is, that helps you navigate through a difficult time. Also, what was important for us was we understood that we would be required to make decisions fairly quickly. And so we were determined that our responsiveness could be timeous. And so we were quite successful at doing that. We made sure that management was available for, you know, meetings and decisions that need to be made. And then the important thing about our operating principles. So, you know, often you find that, you know, your need to react immediately, like COVID required us to do, can conflict with your traditional accountability mechanisms. So, you know, Sansa has strong internal protocols because that's where we find the strength of our governance. And these kind of internal protocols are entrenched and they are an integral part of our governance practices. So, but when you respond to an emergency and to humanitarian needs, you know, there needs to be a conscious effort to find a balance between, you know, adhering to your internal required bureaucracy, but also responding timelessly to the need that is out there. And I think what we did, alhamdulillah, was try and find that balance to remain focused on what we required, but also not to make it too onerous so that the humanitarian need can be delivered on. Communication was very key during COVID, both internally and externally with our partners and collaborators, which was the next point. We partnered with not just donors who wanted to get behind, you know, easing the burdens for those who were suffering the most during COVID, but also government agencies we worked with, as well as family trust and corporates. So that showed us, you know, how partnerships could really work. Sansa brought to the table our years of experience and also brought to the table during COVID our reach and our expertise. And then obviously, importantly, what kind of got us through is that awareness of the team's well-being, that we also need to ensure that our own team remain capable and able to deliver on this task. So their well-being was prioritized. And then obviously the thing that was highlighted during COVID was the digital transformation. And in South Africa, it's important just to note the digital penetration. So in South Africa, when it comes to mobile subscriptions, we have 170% of our population having access to mobile technology. So if we have 60 million people, but we have 98 million mobile subscriptions, it tells you that people have sometimes more than one device. But it does break the stereotype that, you know, poverty in South Africa and that digital penetration wouldn't be that high. So that's a very good statistic for us, specifically if you want to embrace technology. We have more than half of our population being internet users. We also have a great percentage being active social media users, and also in terms of media social users via mobile platform, that's growing potential there. But I think we can see that there is a good spread. And so those organizations and corporates and businesses that want to adopt the digital platforms, there is significant potential to reach the audience that we intend to reach. And I think also in terms of business, making transacting via digital platforms easier. We have e-wallets, we have handheld devices for payments, we have the way of being able to transfer money, cash, cardless transfers. So banks are starting to get into the fintech space as well as new entrants into that market. And the importance of this for South Africa is that financial exclusion is a big challenge, and this fintech and the growth of fintech helps us to bring more people into the financial sector. So talking about the digitization, I want to just put up again Sansa's model and show you which of our aspects of our business model and our operating model has been digitized. So you can see that on the left side, on our collection side, almost all of our activities relating to Zakat collection has some element of digitization. However, on our distribution side, there's still lots of room for growth and development, but at least we feel comfortable that we are starting to move in that direction. And some of our insights is that, you know, our digital footprint includes online donations, it includes Zakat calculators, Zakat apps. We have on our website for Zakat advocacy and donor engagement, an Ask Maulana service. So any Zakat question you have, you can do that online. And we're looking to turn that into artificial intelligence with maybe a bot that can do that kind of thing. We also have crowdfunding, online Zakat guides, and even online Qurbani Nia processing so that you can make intention online, pay for your Qurbani, and it will get taken care of. So just in terms of Sansa's milestone over the last year, we've collected about 12 million via the website, and I think it had partly to do with social distancing and people not wanting to come out. But besides that, it started to give our donors a comfort that Sansa has a safe platform. So we're hoping that this will continue. Our social media reach is not significant in to many other organizations, perhaps outside of South Africa, but we have a growing number. It's now 110,000 individuals, and we're tracking that number, and we're happy to see that it grows. We have unique visitors also still visiting our website, and we're tracking that. However, we're wanting to make the point that we do believe we still have a very strong bias towards serving the Muzaki digitally than the Mustahiq, and we have a strategy to deal with that. I think in closing, I want to just take some insights from managing from our side, our Zakat management insights, that I believe that sustainability and self-reliance as a Zakat management organization is a strategic imperative. As an organization and as the CEO of the organization, I think I often sit with, asking the question, how do we as an organization sustain ourselves? We've been running for 47, 48 years, alhamdulillah. How do we ensure the next 50 years? And those are strategic imperatives and should be high on any organization's business plan, how to become self-sustainable. And I think some of the important things to talk about there is around how, when you dealt with the pandemic, how do you build an anticipatory financing mechanism so that you raise finance in advance and it's available when those crises hit. But we also know when you work with Zakat, what are the stipulations with Zakat in terms of collecting Zakat and distributing Zakat. So I think perhaps there's an opportunity to collect the non-Zakats and do some investment there and have that as a funding mechanism in anticipation of pandemics or crises. I think for us also in South Africa, economic pressures, South Africa's economic growth has, in fact, pre-COVID, we were already seeing very low economic growth. During COVID, there was almost talks of a recession. So we need to balance that versus the Zakat potential. So on the one hand, there's pressures in our economy and disposable income being impacted. On the other hand, we believe that there is a high potential for Zakat that we haven't untapped yet. We collect, as I said, about 170 million. But if we do a rough calculation of all the Zakat collection organizations in South Africa, with the top 5 to 7, we're potentially collecting about 2 billion. But the potential of wealth amongst Muslims, alhamdulillah, in South Africa is probably at about 10 billion. So I think there is a role to play for Zakat advocacy, Zakat education and training. Also institutionalizing Zakat. So there is still some level of resistance to institutionalize Zakat. So we need to encourage the pooling of resources, because we say that if you pay your Zakat to an organization like Sansa, collectively, I'm going to use that number again, the 170 million that we collect can do so much more as we pool those resources than possibly individuals doing it on a smaller scale. We understand the benefit of distributing your Zakat personally, but we're also saying that there is this view that institutionalized Zakat can also be impactful. And then also there needs to be continuous assessment of your focus area. So right now, South Africa, we're saying, should we amplify our focus on the youth? Because currently, as I mentioned earlier, youth unemployment is around 70%. So whilst we're investing in their education, once they qualify, how do we tell them where to go and fish? So that is something from an insight in terms of the changing environment is something that we have to continuously look at. A dynamic in the social construct in South Africa is single mothers, whether we're talking about divorces or women being abandoned and having to struggle to raise a family. We continuously looking at these things and saying, where are the burning issues that we need to perhaps channel our focus, and assessing it in a couple of years to see whether any other socioeconomic dynamic needs to be prioritized again. As I mentioned earlier, partnership and the collaborations are important, and specifically if we're addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think just SDG 17 is about how we network and collaborate as well, because I think trying to address the other 16 will require a lot more partnerships and collaborations. And if we can only achieve number 1, it would be phenomenal in terms of addressing poverty and leaving nobody behind. And as I've touched on this a little bit, the role of technology and social media can help us deliver an effective service to all our stakeholders. I think just from our insights in the past couple of years, what are the key things for Zakat management organizations such as ourselves? These seem to be the things that we need to focus on and kind of channel our attention to. So Jazakallah, I hope that has helped you get an understanding of Sansa as an organization, and the kind of things that we do and our context in terms of where we are at in South Africa as a Muslim minority, but also as one of the largest Zakat collection and distribution agents in country.
Thank you, Yasmina, for that presentation. Really insightful and gave us a lot of confidence and a boost to see all the work that's happening in the Zakat sector over there in South Africa, and the in-depth and the details that Sansa is going into to take care of all the details. And we have quite a few questions coming in actually. So I'll ask the first question. As a leader for Sansa in South Africa, what would you say are your major challenges or the emerging challenges that you're currently facing in the Zakat sector?
I think just obviously I have to contextualize my response within our environment. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, the biggest challenge is to remain relevant, and is to say, how do we stay in touch with what the need is out there? And the need, and I'm not necessarily just speaking need from the point of the mustahiq, also the need of the muzaki. What does the donor want in terms of choosing that service provider that is going to do the right thing in dispersing my zakah? And also, what does the mustahiq require in terms of how we design our projects and programs? But then also, because we don't operate in isolation, what does the broader public want from an organization such as Sansa? What role do we need to play in society? So that element of relevance, and then understanding that you're also an employer, you have responsibilities internally, and are you relevant in terms of attracting the right talent, the right resources? Because as NGOs, technically we have to operate on a shoestring budget. And so if you can find ways to leverage everything that you have in the organization for greater value and for greater value add, then you have to look at those things that has potential. And that also means the skills that you employ and the technology that you employ. And obviously technology is a good enabler, but there's always the question, can NGOs afford the cost of infrastructure? And so when we talk about relevance and sustainability, is finding those partners that understand the dynamics of an NGO and wanting to invest not just in your projects and programs, but invest in enabling you as a service provider to continue and therefore help that sustainability. So I think for me, though, that and there are many other kind of subsets, but once you kind of achieve that relevance and the public see you as an organization that understands and knows and is in touch on every sphere and every aspect, then I think it does feed your sustainability. So for me, those two things do go hand in glove.
Right. Thank you, Jasmina. Just a follow-up question, I guess it's related to the emerging issues question that we discussed right now, is how do you collect zakat from digital currencies and cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or the other altcoins? Is there any specific guidance or percentage that Sansa has released for the public?
So unfortunately not. It's not something that we have come across yet. We have received inquiries though. If you look at the model, there's the element that speak to fiqh of zakah and our role there. So in terms of our Sharia Advisory Council, they've assisted us in satisfying some of our donor inquiries on how to pay zakah on cryptocurrency. So there would be donors in South Africa that have cryptocurrency and wanting to be guided on is it number one, zakat due on this, and how do we go ahead and pay that? So I think from just our experience, that is kind of, it's unfortunately just been limited to helping others, our Muzaki understand that. But paying from cryptocurrency, we haven't seen that come through. We've facilitated that on our website, so we're able to do that, but unfortunately not yet. Perhaps international donors might be a little bit more open there, but not in South Africa as yet.
Right, right. Nice to know that. Alhamdulillah. All right. So the next question that we have is with regards to the role of women in zakat sector. So the question is, how important do we see the role of women in the zakat sector, be it at an individual level, home level, educational, institutional level, or even at organizational level?
Yeah. Okay, very good question. I think I very seldom get the question of the role of women in Zakat section. I always get the question of the role of women in the NGO sector, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think it's a different perspective if you think of the aspect of Zakat. And I think when you look at the role of women in terms of all facets of a woman's lives, I think we always talk about the first role of women in the life of a child, which is that of an educator. And I think that's important because I think education starts right at a young age. So not only putting your child on your lap and teaching them the pillars of Islam, but it is about how you pay your zakah and engage your children in the idea of not zakah as an obligation, but zakah as an enabler, and why and how we do this as an act of ibadah, but also in terms of having the compassion for those who don't have. I think from that perspective, in a more formalized perspective, I think the role of women in terms of educating themselves. So in the family unit, in the family setup, does women know their own rights in terms of, or responsibilities in terms of zakah? So if I have wealth, if I have inherited, if I'm a businesswoman, do I leave that up to my husband, or do I know that this is an ibadah, and as equal as we are to men and our responsibilities, so too Allah will have the same expectation of us as women to fulfill those obligations, and we will be rewarded equally to men, and so too we will be punished equally to men if we don't fulfill that. So that's an important component. But I think also in terms of educating, so I do a lot on zakah advocacy, and I run many zakah seminars for women specifically, because we do find that there are specific questions, and particularly women want to know a lot about jewelry and the har and what they've received as their dowry and those kinds of things. And alhamdulillah, through IBF, in terms of my own qualification, doing the certificate in zakah management, that was a great help. And I think it's important that women learn about these things and they understand zakah, because it's often the most neglected pillar of Islam. So women have a key role in the education thereof, but in their own distribution of zakah, but also kind of leading the conversation in other aspects amongst friends and families, playing that role of consciousness amongst, your friends, amongst your family, to drive the debate and the conversation, and then leading role. If I look at my own experience, my own context as a female running a zakah organization, I think it's understanding the benefits of zakah, understanding what the intent of zakah is, and the entire Islamic finance ecosystem, where zakah and waqaf and qard al-hasan and all of those kind of poverty alleviating tools sits. I think the role of women is significant in the zakah sector.
Right. Thank you for that. All right. So the next question, it's based on the discussion we had with regards to, let's say, the network that's required for a zakat organization such as Sansa. and be it sustainability and the funds and whatnot. So, what happens with regards to the impact when organizations like United Nations or other international charity bodies, they also get into the zakat sector? So,
Yeah.
has that been helpful for Sansaf, or has there been like some hindrance, or how would you look
Mm.
at this entrance?
We're still trying to find our way around this, because I think I've had many conversations with entities as you are referring to. And so you're wanting to understand their mandate and even their operating model to determine whether there is potential collaboration and partnership opportunities. I think my personal experience in wanting to be satisfied that they understand the importance of distribution of zakah. I thus far have not been given satisfactory answers in terms of what the Sharia compliance is, and even the engagement of a Sharia board or a Sharia body. So that is concerning for me, in the sense that we very strict about our distribution of zakah. We stick to Surah Tawbah, the 8 categories, and we have our own Sharia advisory council that guides us if there's any areas that we are not familiar with. And we try to do that because essentially we are ultimately responsible for that zakah. You cannot collect zakah for the sake of collecting zakah. Just as much as you collect, you have to take on that responsibility of distributing, because there's so much responsibility that go with it, and the governance that speaks to have you distributed this effectively. So when other entities do come on board, and you have to ask about, you know, do 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 do, do they democratize that development that they bring to another country by including the local organizations that has probably a stronger and a better understanding of the local dynamics, and often able to reach marginalized population better than international bodies coming into the country. And often you find that the local organizations have less bureaucracy and less politics. And so it would be easier to partner, these international bodies coming into your country. But I think when it comes to zakah, there has to be that consciousness that there is another layer of compliance that we have to be satisfied with. So we would not want to partner with any, call it aid body or whatever, that do not satisfy us that the distribution of the zakah. If there is a potential to partner with us on the understanding that we have the capability, we would be happy then to bring that in, because we have, I think, reported significantly, and we have comfort that we follow strict guidelines in the distribution. So I think we can't stop it. I think it looking at the potential. I think if the more we put out there on the strength of zakah and the potential that zakah have, and I think research that was done, even IBF Net, I think, was publishing the fact that there's potential $3 trillion collected annually. That doesn't go unnoticed by the international aid world. And so that becomes a target. And there's always going to be the narrative of how do we take a share of that. And looking at what the biggest humanitarian crisis at the moment is, and people would argue it's the refugee crisis. And there is a disproportionate share of that towards the Muslim population. And so they're saying, if the zakah is available, how do we channel that zakah to this big humanitarian crisis? But I think once again, there has to be an acknowledgement that these organizations must first satisfy that they have the correct governance in place to comply with Sharia in distributing zakah, because that is somebody else's responsibility. And that's an amana that they take on. And can they be an amil? They qualify as an amil, and we get onto those kind of technical conversations as well. I hope I answered your question. I kind of went off slightly.
No, no, it was completely bullseye on point. Thank you so much for that. Alhamdulillah. Okay, I think we can move on to the last question for today, which is, I mean, Sansa has been around for quite some time, alhamdulillah, and you've seen a gradual progression of maybe, let's say, the different ways in which zakat could be collected. I mean, it used to be door to door, hand to hand, and now slowly we moved on to the internet and there's collection happening. So, you as a leader, how do you see the impact of technology on the zakat sector or in zakat management and collection itself?
So I think technology affects all of us. It affects individuals in terms of how they communicate, how they learn, how they think. I think also technology helps society determine how people interact with each other on a daily basis. So it plays a very important role. From a developmental perspective, I think from our side, we see the importance of technology that must be employed to empower and upskill, because it is the way of the future. So when we talk to how our projects and programs are designed, what proportion of that speaks to the world of technology and educating those who can actually find and secure employment in that, because it's a growing industry. So from that perspective, but I think also in terms of financial inclusion, we speak to those who are excluded from their own economic determination. And so fintech, for me, is going to be a big game changer, particularly in the zakat distribution sector. And I think it can make an organization more effective. It can help restore the dignity of the mustahiq. I think in terms of people not having to queue, people not having to, kind and stand outside of an organization where they're collecting food hampers or whatever. It could be digitized to such an extent that the dignity is protected, the identity is protected. But the risk with that is that it becomes very robotic, it becomes less personal. So we have to find that balance around where the trust issues also start to play a role, your security issues start to play a role. How do you assess correctly, all of those things. But I think one can navigate through that. I do believe technology certainly impacts social institutions, families, education, even NGOs ourselves, and religion itself. And we've seen it with COVID, how many people went online to even listen to a nasiha, to even tune into the Friday Jum'ah because the masajids were closed. So I think technology impacts us on various levels. In the collection and distribution of zakah, we've seen a little taste of it during the lockdown. So there's huge potential for it. But there's always has to be the acknowledgement that it is an expensive procurement for an NGO, particularly when we find that donors aren't excited about NGOs spending money on overheads, and that essentially would be seen as an overhead. And we need donors to understand that potentially there is also infrastructure development that leads to efficiencies that can benefit the beneficiaries in the longer run. So I think from my perspective, it has a role just in terms of how we incorporate that into our projects and programs. It has a role in how we service our stakeholders, and it has a role in how it can make us more efficient. But having said that, I always believe technology should be employed in the sense, and the mustahiq, for me, needs to determine how we deploy technology. If the mustahiq is an elderly person who cannot, we should be able to have that option available to deliver the personal service. If the mustahiq is somebody who's comfortable with technology, then we should be able to offer that as a service. But I don't see a future where we are an AI world as a zakah management organization. I see where we have a basket of services, and it is driven by the need of the mustahiq as well as the need of the muzaki, which varies in terms of, I think, also just generational gaps, and I think openness and kind of capability when it comes to technology.
Thank you so much for that, Yasmina. So with that, alhamdulillah, it brings us to the end of today's webinar. We would like to thank all our students and our viewers from across the world for tuning in today. We would, of course, like to thank our esteemed speaker for her time and for having this dialogue with us and for sharing so many insightful points. We hope to see you all in our next webinar very soon, inshallah. So please do stay tuned for our latest announcements. And we've also shared the link for the certificate in Zakat management that Sister Yasmina mentioned. It's in the chat. So those who are interested to learn and enhance their skill sets further, inshallah, they could have a look at that also. Right. So with that, Jazakumullah khair, Sister Yasmina, again, thank you so much.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having us and for giving us the opportunity to speak about our organization and our insights.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Hope to have many more discussions with you, inshallah.
Ameen, inshallah.
All right, with that, let's close today's webinar. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.